It looks like we have all board members present now.
Yep, and we are good to go whenever you are ready.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the December 3rd special meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Perez and seconded by Colton. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Director Perez, will you please read our purpose statement?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. And we have one action item today. It is our return to hybrid learning for grades PK through 12.
I move the board approve the transition to the hybrid learning model for grades PK through 12 starting on December 7th.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum and seconded by Bankin. Discussion. Superintendent Reisner, would you like to give some background here?
Certainly. Thank you so much for that opportunity. I will have Dr. Arnold share kind of where we're at today and what that means and where, why the motion was brought forward. I just first want to take an opportunity to address the confusion from the data submission earlier this week. So when we were submitting our application for an extension for permission from the Department of Education for another 2 weeks of online learning, we used our rate of quarantine and positivity for the year rather than for the current week. That data for the year was intended for a different Department of Ed report that was side by side, and it got copied and pasted into the application. So the data that was reported had no impact on our approval from the Department of Education. We corrected it as soon as it was brought to our attention, and I appreciate that it was brought to our attention. Then immediately I spoke with the Department of Education, who informed me that that data didn't have any bearing on the approval. But I really want to be clear on this. There was no attempt to keep students online by using these numbers, nor was there false data or falsified data reported. I take that seriously, and my staff and this entire board have worked tirelessly to be transparent and to provide accurate data, of which we have done. So I really hope that we can look at the greatness that Ames has, because the belittling of each other and the belittling of our board members and our employees is really setting a horrible example for our students and our community that we serve. I realize that the number of people who are doing that is very small, but regardless, it's unfortunate that this is how we're choosing to interact. So I'm asking that people put aside their personal bias and represent Ames in a way that we can all have differing opinions and be respectful to one another in having those different opinions. So as we move forward, I wanted to also talk about why we're here today, making this recommendation on November 23rd. If you remember back, it seems like forever ago, but it wasn't. The board approved a revised decision-making matrix. And the reason for this matrix was a desire to be able to make decisions based on our classroom and our building needs, as well as our community daily case rate numbers. And so that revision was made and approved on the 23rd. At that point, I was asked by the board to watch the numbers and bring a recommendation or think about bringing a recommendation when we met those indicators or were getting in a position where we thought we would meet them. And so that's what brought us here today. And I wanted to then follow up with Dr. Arnold, giving some of the specifics and what we can maybe predict or not predict, because COVID is ever changing. So Dr. Arnold, are you? I didn't see, but are you on? You're not on. Okay, thank you.
And Eric, if you would pull up the board metrics report, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to present the board with an update on our Story County local metrics. As you can see on this first page, our 14-day positivity is 10.4 and our 7-day positivity is 9.2. I share those, but just as a reminder, those are no longer part of our metrics, but they are part of the state's metrics. Our 14-day average new daily case rate is currently 63.5. This represents a decline from our most recent meeting. We were over 100 at our previous meeting. I put together this graph below to show some possible projections. And again, like Superintendent Reisner said, their projections, trying just to look at what could happen. We could see a bump yet from Thanksgiving that we haven't started to see impact data, but I wanted to kind of look at what the numbers would need to be or would have to be to make us either change or not to change, make a recommended change or not change. So our 7-day average of positive cases is around 40. But if you account for holiday testing reductions, I projected based on average new daily diagnosed cases at 50, 60, and 70 cases per day. So those are the lines you'll see. The black line is 70 cases per day, the purple would be at 60, and the blue is at 50, just to kind of give an idea of that. If we average less than about 60 cases per day over the next 2 weeks, we would stay below our override community indicator of 60. And that's where that recommendation is to move to 100% remote. Less than 60 then relies a little more on our internal indicators. If we do average more than 70 cases per day, that could push us, depending on how high above 70 cases we are, that could push us above that override line again prior to winter break. With this, just as a reminder, with those new metrics, if at a case rate, 14-day average new daily case rate higher than 60, the recommendation is to move to 100% remote learning. Less than 60 then looks at our internal indicators. Currently with our internal indicators, it's hard to tell on student absence rate, obviously being remote, as well as we expect that our staff absence rate is also possibly impacted. We've tried to account for that. We are currently in green for our for all indicators for our high school and elementary schools. The middle school does have a yellow indicator in the staff. Still under that guidance, if we were in our traditional red, not override red, that would move us up into that hybrid recommendation for all 3 levels, assuming that case rate of less than 60. If you want to scroll on just a little bit, I can talk about what we are seeing as far as positives and quarantines in the district currently. Today we have 6 students across the district who are positive for COVID-19 and 40 quarantining due to being identified as close contacts. Again, I believe our quarantine numbers may be a bit low because the majority of our students are remote and those quarantines are being identified through self-report. We have been receiving some report through teachers when they're interacting with the children online of possible quarantines, and we're following up on those, but we're not seeing as many reported directly from parents. As far as staff, there are 4 positive for COVID-19 and 9 quarantining due to close contacts and 1 pending a test result. We've seen obviously a decrease in these numbers due to that remote period and due to Thanksgiving break. And the graphs below just kind of, again, show that where we have been over since the end of October. And just also to let the board know, since the CDC did release new updated quarantine guidance yesterday, we're currently working through that reduced guidance, or that reduced quarantine time period guidance. The CDC recommendation decreases our time period for quarantine from 14 to 10 days, as long as the person remains well. There's an additional option to end quarantine at 7 days if the person receives a negative COVID test on their 5th day of quarantine, so or later. So I'm working with the school nurses and working with trying to identify staff who that would impact and share that information with them. Those numbers have not yet been reduced, as we haven't contacted the staff and students as we're working through the process on the identification. Iowa has, IDPH has said that they will be following and recommending the new changes to the CDC guidance. However, they still have not distributed their specific wording and their recommendation, but we are working to see how that's going to impact and communicate with those individuals that are affected. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question on the projection data, Kathy, if we can scroll back up to that. So that's based on assuming that case rate per day would remain stable for 14 days, right?
Right.
Have
right.
we ever had any time in the history of COVID where Ames can remain stable at that? I mean, given the exponential growth of disease, I don't think the growth factors allow us to ever stay there. We either have to be like at 100 or we have to be at like 10 or 20, right?
Exactly. And we haven't seen a middle ground in general. I just wanted, I did these projections just to kind of see where that tipping point would be. Obviously, if we did see the 100, if we went back into the hundreds again, that would be pretty obvious that it would push us over. But I was trying to identify where that break point would be from a trending perspective.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I mean, like you said, it's difficult to anticipate because we don't actually know what the next few weeks will be like. I mean, looking at the data, tomorrow, effectively, we're going to probably drop from 63 down to 53 because we're going to drop off 170 positives, right?
Exactly.
So the next few days are either going to go dramatically down or flip back up.
Right. We're dropping off some of our higher count days, so we should see a dip. We haven't had as many high positive result days, though, you know, with the amount of time we are after, or a week after Thanksgiving, we could start seeing an increase. I just don't know to the rate and how that would impact, because it's really going to depend on how many positives we have.
Has the state of Iowa given any projections of what they anticipate the next few weeks?
I had not received anything specifically to Story County, though in our discussions with the community partners meeting, there is an agreement that it will be an anticipated increase from Thanksgiving, though I do not have specific projections for Story County.
And that meeting was with the community partners, Director Beerbaum was today. So, you know, that was the current feeling from the community partners.
So do we know then, Jenny, why the DOE approved the 14-day extension? I mean, given that all of our data has us, I mean, we're well below the limits they've generally established.
My conversations with the DE, they didn't pinpoint one reason why or they're approving everyone's applications, but they are approving the bulk of the applications. I don't have any data on whether any have not been approved, but in the discussion, they said that they're really looking more at Iowa as a whole, not county by county right now. They're looking as a whole where our whole system is versus county by county.
So I noticed in the letter that we had sent down first, we did specifically tell them that we'd be following our guidance and that you and Kathy would be evaluating numbers every day. And you were very clear with them that our hope was to return to hybrid before the 2-week period ended. I mean, I also noted that in that letter, we said that right now we have widespread absenteeism that makes it so we can't cover our buildings. I mean, do you think they took either of those two things into account? Because it sounds like right now we don't have absenteeism that would keep the buildings from being there. I mean, did we when we sent that letter, or were we in the green?
So here, two things. Great question. Number one, that's what they're looking at overall as a state, not specific to each district. And so we anticipate, and we have had an increase and knew we would have an increase in staff reporting illness. And so that is what that was based on, knowing that increase, that we weren't in that because of, and I don't remember if I mentioned it in that letter or in our discussion with Department of Education, because we are in remote, what districts are seeing, you're in remote, but that people aren't reporting illness and absenteeism. And so then you go back and you don't have staff to cover classrooms. And so that was the discussion I had with them and our our superintendent's group that meets almost weekly. I think there's like 200 of us or 100 and something. And so that's pretty consistent with what we're all looking ahead at, so that we're not reacting right when we come out of our 100% remote and we don't have staff to cover classrooms. So did that factor into their decision? No, because again, they're looking at it as a whole state and what all districts are struggling with.
Okay, so when we said in there that the spread has resulted in significant staff and student absenteeism, what you actually meant is we anticipate that the future cases will result in significant staff absenteeism?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that that is, I believe, I don't want to speak for the Department of Education, but I believe that is what the Department of Education is basing all of their approvals on. I know there's been discussion at a state level that, well, they're not following their own metrics that they set, the Department of Education, speaking of, but they can't. I mean, once we're all in this and we're seeing the impact on classrooms, we have to plan ahead. We have to know that that we're going to return. There's going to be the impact on classrooms. We already know that teachers have begun reporting now that they know there's the potential for coming back. We knew it. We'd see that surge, and we are beginning to see that. Correct, Dr. Arnold? Among staff.
That is, we have started receiving some anticipated absence due to illness, non-COVID related, which is one of the factors that factor into staff absence rate.
And the state takes that into consideration as well. So they're not necessarily just looking at the number of COVID and quarantine. They also look at, just absences in general. And as we head into flu season, that potential of what that means to staff absenteeism.
Well, and you said they probably didn't even look at our data at all then. They're basing it on the state data and just approving everybody. I mean, that's effectively what you said, right?
I don't know that they're just approving everybody. I didn't look to see if anybody has not been approved. Dr. Arnold, you sometimes watch that. I don't. I just know that what they indicated to me was that they were really not looking at the data that we were putting in the application. They were looking at the state as a whole and the stress on our classrooms and then, that idea that, So I can't say that they said they're approving everybody, but I would say I got the feeling that if you apply, you're probably getting approved.
Well, then you had brought up the staff too. I don't, for any public watching, we've gotten a lot of email from staff in the last 24 hours. One of the things that surprised me in those emails was it seemed like staff were very surprised that hybrid was going to be considered. I kind of wondered why why did staff think that we were absolutely committed to 2 weeks more remote, given that what we said at the board meeting, and also what we were telling the DOE, and what you told us in email on Monday was that we might end up considering hybrid this week. Was there a reason that staff were caught off guard by that, or?
I could only speculate. I think one of the reasons is probably because in the past, when we received approval, we stayed in it for that entire 2 weeks. And so that's, my thought is when they go into it, they probably assume we're in it for that entire 2 weeks. And because that has been what we've done in the past. I'm sorry, I could only speculate on that. I don't know the conversations at the building levels that principals may have had or may not have had with staff, but I would guess that, that's probably why. I don't know that, all our teachers watch board meetings or, necessarily read every bit of communication that comes out. We have a lot of communication that comes out, and so I don't know if there's more to it than that. I'm not aware of it, but I can certainly do some digging and see.
Okay, I just wondered because it seemed like teachers were very surprised, and based on some of the emails we've seen, I guess I can see how they might have been surprised, because it seemed like maybe we were saying that the board had committed to being 100% online for 2 weeks, when actually what we had said and what we had told the state was we were going to continue to monitor daily. And I think it's just important that whatever the plan is that we're actually going after at the high level, we make sure staff understands that so they're not surprised, because I feel for them. I mean, they've been planning for next week, and if they shouldn't get that surprise, they should know what's coming up. Thank you.
I have a question for Superintendent Reisner and the board, I guess, really. But first of all, I just want to say thank you to Superintendent Reisner and her team for all their work through all of this. It feels like it's been a really chaotic, it feels like it's been a few weeks, but I think it's only been a few days. So I want to acknowledge you and all your work. I also want to thank the 146 participants on the Zoom call who have joined in for this conversation. I appreciate your engagement. My actual question is, I'm feeling, I guess what Director Beerbaum just said about the teachers, I'm feeling confused about why we're here. I feel like the reason we're here is that there's a conflict between the board and state decision-making matrices. We've been told as a board that we cannot use district-created measures to overrule decisions made by the Department of Education. So I'm wondering if someone can tell me why, if the Department of Ed has told us that they've used state metrics to approve our request for district-wide online learning through December 14th, that we should now use district-created measures to overrule decisions made by the Department of Ed.
I think that's a great question. The response I would, and I think you directed it to me and the board, so I'll let the board also answer. I don't know if, I think maybe I don't know if it was a directive or if it was made very clear to me what I believed by the board at the last meeting that we had, that there was a desire to continue to watch the numbers, and we absolutely do that anyway, said we would continue to do that. And if we met the metrics that the board set, that we would bring a recommendation back to the board. And so that's what prompted this recommendation, because we watched these numbers and we knew we were going to probably by the end of the week fall into the area where we met those metrics. And so that's why we're here. But I certainly think it's a great discussion to have in terms of, let's make it clear and let's be consistent as a board. Do we want to, when approved, to go remote for 2 weeks? Do we want to just stay within that for the 2-week period? And I will speak on behalf of the teachers. It is very, very difficult for them to turn around this quickly and move in and out of learning models. And I know that we've said all along, we have to be flexible. We have to be prepared to do that. But that does not negate the fact that it is really, really difficult for staff to do that. So I just would like clear direction from the board on, which direction we want to go, because we definitely would support that.
I guess just to clarify then, so what you're saying is that you brought this motion because of direction from the board. But I think one of the new pieces for me, because I agree, I think that the board has been clear that we were going to use our metrics. We went through this big whole rigmarole, and we had the working group, devise these metrics. But it feels like the new piece of information is that the state is now using metrics that we didn't know they were using, right? That perhaps the state response, because Iowa is literally on fire, is that's what they're focusing on. And perhaps, I guess I feel like I'm trying to intuit the reason they made the decision using these different metrics. Is this part of what they want us to be doing to address the proliferation of COVID in the state? And why now would we be using our metrics to override their plans? I'm feeling really confused.
Me too. I agree. And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know that the Department of Education could ever come out and say, this is the strategy we're using, because that doesn't fit within kind of the message that the governor or just that doesn't fit the narrative. What I will say is we did do a quick look, and the applications that have been submitted since Thanksgiving have all been approved. So the Department of Ed has approved every request for remote learning since that time. So that does, I guess, play into maybe not fully understanding why, but I think at the same moment, we don't know if they could go back and begin not approving them either. So it's hard, like you said, it's really confusing. It's hard to know which way we go. I think, an effort by us and my staff is that, we have this decision-making matrix. I think we publicly said we are going to follow this, and if we are meeting those metrics before the end of the 2 weeks, we will be back and we'll come back to the table and reconsider. So that's really the reason I want to make sure that, what we said a week or two ago, maybe it was longer, but that's what we're doing. And then but I think this is a really appropriate discussion, because I think that we have the ability to say, do we want to do it that way? Or do we want to stick with, when the state gives us the 2-week approval, we stay in that environment for 2 weeks?
I think one thing we should take into account is right now we're not in that situation, right? We've been in for over 2 weeks, and we got the approval so we could be in for 3 weeks. And yeah, as far as the question, I think that have been asked, yeah, the guidance and the recommendations, that document we all went through is pretty clear that, yeah, you're doing exactly what we asked you, right? You're evaluating it every day and coming back with recommendations based on what you see. I think it is an interesting thing about this state, as Director Binkin brought up, why are they approving everybody right now, and what would we do there? We do make the request, right? Like, we request if we want to be in. And that's why I had the questions I did about the request, because in our request to the state that got approved, we were very explicit that, one, we don't have enough staff to keep the buildings open, and two, we're going to continue to monitor the numbers and we hope to get into hybrid. Now, if they didn't take that into account, or might not have taken that into account, I have no idea what to do with that. If the state's both approving everybody and not even reading the details to make that decision, that's I don't know how to think through that and add that to our decision, But that's what I would say about the key question there, though you had Director Binkin of. Yeah, I think we have in the metrics that it'd be continually evaluated. As far as the time to shift, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, Jenny, but I think one thing we could consider in the future is, if and when we get back to hybrid or some other model, and if we have to come back to online only, I think it'd be very reasonable to say, we're going to be an online only for at least X amount of weeks, where X might be 2, right? And in this case, we've done that. I don't know. Do you have, so you made a statement though that it takes a lot of time and effort to switch. So are you currently thinking that it would require too much time to switch to get into hybrid for next week? Is that a concern that you currently have?
It is a concern. It is a concern that I have. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to that again. It definitely is a concern that I have. I now and understand that while I say this, I realize there is a large group of teachers that feel like, nope, we can make that shift. We're prepared, but everybody teaches differently and teaches a different subject area. And so with that, there's also teachers that it is going to be very hard just because of how they teach, what they teach, for them to do this quick of a turnaround. It's a little different when we're going from hybrid to remote. We can make that switch a little quicker than when we're coming back into it. And that's just something we've learned along the way. So this is all new. How we move in and out of this looks good on paper, but then in reality, it's tougher than what we thought. And so I would say that I definitely am concerned about the teachers being able to move into that by Monday. Giving them some additional days might be really helpful. And then do we think about, okay, so if we were going to give them let's just say we were going to wait until Wednesday, then is it really worth coming back Wednesday or waiting until the following Monday when we would have come back anyway? So, I don't know that there's one right answer or wrong answer, because you also have heard me be very, very concerned about our early learners and the state that they're in. And I continue to have that concern. I am still very concerned about our preschool, kindergarten, first grade learners. And so I internally, I really struggle and I think our kids need to be back in school. But I also understand the risk and the difficulty that it poses. Thanks for letting me speak.
So I mean, based on what you just said there about the time and stuff, what is your current recommendation then?
I think I have to go on what the board metrics are. So if we adopted these metrics, I don't know that me veering outside of the metrics would be appropriate, or I don't know when that would be right and when that wouldn't be right. So I think my recommendation needs to be in line and needs to be consistent, and not be because we received emails this way or that way. That's not how I need to operate as a leader. The way I need to operate is off of consistency and off of science and off of the facts. And so we put a lot of work into this decision-making matrix, and we adopted it. And I was given my orders that, this is how we move forward with this. And so that's what I'm doing. In terms of, then my professional opinion, I think the turnaround time is really hard for staff. I would like to see, if I had a recommendation, I would like to see the board give me direction on whether they want to remain in the model for the period of time that we're approved. So that we can have that be consistent, or whether they want the metrics watched and this brought back. And I'm worried about our learners. So it would be inappropriate of me not to act with consistency and with the data that the board has provided me to make recommendations on.
I think that holidays have been really consistent in terms of spikes afterward. 10 to 14 days. We've had some pretty big spikes after every holiday. I don't think Thanksgiving is going to be much different. I know there were communications that went out from the governor and from other people requesting that people don't go to family members' houses, but, and travel, but it's happened. There were parties before Iowa State students left. There were huge backyard parties. I saw pictures of those. My biggest concern is the transition time if we were to go back Monday, and then you add in when the holiday spike kicks in, a few days later, we would go right back to online. That is the worst possible situation for our teachers. It's jarring for students. It's terrible for parents that are trying to arrange daycare if they have to do it a week in advance or whatever. I just don't think it's a wise decision. And I do think that if we're granted 2 weeks by the state, again, like you said, they may not be communicating with us what they're going off of for everything, because it could be a mixed message. We know that they did grant it for everyone. They are seeing that we had 70 deaths today in the state of Iowa. This is very serious. The cases are serious. People are dying more. I just don't feel that it's right for us to go hybrid Monday and then have a possibility of going back online again in a couple of days.
Jenny, can I go back to what you were just talking about for a minute? Because I'm a little confused. You were saying that your obligation is to follow the metrics that were established by the board. But what I guess I'm asking you, if you're looking at the numbers every day, are you saying that within that decision, the time frame of when transitions are made should not be considered or should be considered? And if they should be considered, what is it in your professional opinion should be the time frame for when numbers start to decline that you can switch to a different mode of learning?
If I didn't capture this question right, please re-ask it. I believe that we have said all along that we needed that 3-day window to move beyond, or it was in our original plan back in, I don't know, July maybe, who knows? But we needed 3 days to move into a different learning model. And I realize even 3 days is tough, but we did say that. In this case, it's Thursday, so they would only have the rest of today, which really I wouldn't even count. They would have 1 day to move into a different learning model on Monday. And so that's where I would say that's way too quick of a turnaround. So I hope that, I hope that that makes sense. I know that either way, it's still a really quick turnaround, even with 3 days, but it's a lot easier if they have, if we make that decision, they have their 3 days and then we're able to. So while it's not ideal, I think 3 days would be my recommendation. And please hear me, staff, when I say I realize that's tough too, but I think that's what I would, I think given the situation, we may not know far enough in advance.
So are you desiring to adjust your recommendation then? Because I believe the recommendation on here is for Monday. What I'm hearing you maybe give a different recommendation for Wednesday?
So I'm trying to follow what the board asked me to do. And so what the board asked was that if we felt like we were going to be back in within the metrics that would allow us to come back to make a recommendation. So I can certainly adjust that, or you can adjust it, or I don't have to make it that way in the future. But I guess I just need direction from the board.
I'm just asking your professional opinion though. If you're believing that it takes 3 days, your recommendation based on, because we didn't say that you have to get back in a certain amount of time, we laid out the guidance matrix. So that's what I'm asking is the time period in your professional recommendation based on our guidance matrix and the time you believe it takes, what do you believe would be the best date?
If we were going to come back before our 2-week window is up, I think then it would be next Wednesday.
Okay.
If we were going to come back, if we aren't, if there is, if there's a different desire from the board, I like the consistency of staying in our hybrid in our fully online model for the 2 weeks that were granted.
Can you tell me, Superintendent Reisner, what is the communication with staff the past 2 weeks?
I'm gonna look to Eric we meet as our district leadership team every morning. And then we review the numbers, and then we send a report out from that meeting to the building principals every day. Dr. Hawkins sends that out to the building principals, and that has more than just COVID information on it, but it's everything we talked about. And then from there, the building principals are communicating with their staff. Dr. Hawkins, do you have anything to add to that? Dr. Hawkins works directly with the principals on a daily basis. And so, typically the building principal is communicating directly with their staffs.
No, I don't necessarily have anything to hop in and add to that. I was trying to look through my archived emails from Eric to see what that communication might have looked like to all staff.
That's our process. And so, yes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have left Eric out. Eric could be sending communication out to the buildings as well. Eric, are you able to?
Yeah, I can speak for the last 2 weeks. I was just looking back at what I've sent, and what has been sent to parents, we send to staff first. So what you've gotten as a parent, that's what we have sent to staff specific to district updates.
So when would it the earliest been that staff would have been notified that in your application on December 1st that you'd be monitoring the data daily with the hope of returning before the conclusion of the 2-week period? When would staff been notified of that?
On December 1st, the letter of application is actually linked into the email that was sent to all staff the same day that it was submitted.
Okay.
And before that, when we discussed it as a board, I believe we had an admin meeting the week before. Dr. Hawkins, we had an admin meeting that week, and it was discussed with the principals as well. I'm not sure. Could you look and see, Dr. Hawkins, what that date was that we had that meeting with the principals to share with
you? Bet. Yep, I'll have that in just a second.
So you're saying the communication would have been sent to the building principals that the evaluation of the 2-week time period would be ongoing or daily, I believe is what what was said on November 23rd is that we do a daily review of the data.
Correct. Daily. And that's what we share with the print. They're aware of it anyway. They know we meet every morning about it, but we called them and met with all of them. I believe it was together, but it may have been by secondary, and that was I think the day we determined that we were going to apply for the extension. I can't remember the time.
According to our agenda and notes, Superintendent Reisner, Thursday the 19th, we spent some time talking about it in our all admin meeting about the change from learning models.
And that we would review it regularly. Yeah.
Okay, so that was before our November 23rd board meeting.
But they knew we were reviewing, yes. But in that meeting, we talked about that we would be reviewing it daily, and a recommendation could come before the end of the 2 weeks if we went into another 2 weeks after break.
And I guess I'm asking that question because it's been in the emails that I think the board has received, and the information that you forwarded us from 2 buildings and responses from their staff members. I think Director Bierbaum stated it that teachers have been caught off guard. So I'm struggling to understand how teachers have been caught off guard when what you're telling me is the communication did take place.
I can speak for this week. On early December 1st, which would have been Tuesday, That's when we got word that the Department of Education approved our application. We sent out a notice on that day in the morning, and then later in the day, we sent another communication that had some other information in it as well. But one of the questions, we did kind of an FAQ on that. One of them was, will we stay online for the entire 2 weeks? And we had noted that the DE approves application in 2 weeks, 2-week intervals. We will continue to monitor the local conditions on a daily basis and have the flexibility to move to a hybrid in-person model during that time. That was sent on Tuesday to both our staff and community.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Eric.
I guess I think I'm sharing some of the confusion that that other folks have mentioned here. I remember the discussion about monitoring daily. I didn't take that as a board directive because I don't believe that we asked for input on that from every board member or voted on it or anything like that. So I think it was kind of I left that meeting with the idea that it was a possibility that we could go back before the end of the 2 weeks. Not that it was as soon as we hit that number, we definitely will go back. So I do think as a board, that's something that we need to clarify because we have throughout this process stayed in for the full 2 weeks that we've been granted. And I think it's reasonable that teachers anticipated and just expected that that would be what would happen. I'm sure they are getting a ton of emails just like we all are. And if they missed an email or something, I think it's reasonable. I can understand their confusion. I'm also a little bit questioning having the meeting today because we have not dropped below our metric. And I do understand the projections are that we will. For me, when I think about process, in my mind, I would think when we drop below the metric, then a meeting will be called and we can discuss. And I agree that we need to have a set turnaround time that is reasonable. We heard from a couple of teachers, one who had revised an entire lesson for online and having guest speakers and things like that. We heard from another who had a death in the family and had arranged an online sub and has to completely redo that now and find an in-person sub. There's a lot. I think the 1 day turnaround is unreasonable. And I can't see asking teachers to make the switch that quickly. So I agree that we need to come to some sort of consensus as a board on what that turnaround time is, and that needs to be communicated clearly so that the staff understands if we have been approved for 2 weeks, we might still return to hybrid. This is how many days notice you would have to do that. But I think it's unfair to do that at this point.
So I could set up, I took notes when you were speaking. So what I heard is, and for that, I would like to get discussion from the board on so that I'm clear if this is the procedural way we want to do it. So when we drop below the metric, so we wait until we've dropped below the metric. So that would mean at 59 cases per day, or looking at the absenteeism. When we drop below that, then we would call a meeting and we would say that the turnaround time would be 3 days, or do we want to say we're going with the 2 week approval period regardless? Because if we go with the 2 week approval period, then this would only come into play if we were deciding whether we're going to apply for another 2 weeks.
My personal opinion is that we should go with the 2 week approval period, because I think if the state is approving that, and we know that they have a pretty high threshold for approving those requests, if the state is looking and saying, we think this is reasonable and school should be online, that would be my personal feeling. But I would like to hear from everyone and have a consensus as a board as to whether we want to do a 3 day turnaround or stay for the full 2 weeks.
I would agree with Director Schultz-Cook. I think it was completely reasonable from staff to think that we will remain 2 weeks, given that we've been said that that was one of our issues, our concerns, that we would not get approval from the Department of Ed if we needed it, and they did. So I think it's completely reasonable for the staff to be concerned and be confused. So I agree with Director Schultz-Cook. The 2 week, I think it's reasonable, and under when we get under that point. That was my assumption for both of those points. So thank you for clarifying.
Dr. Arnold, do you know why did the state, how did they come up? What was their reasoning for the 2 week window, approval in 2 week increments? Is it based on the 14-day quarantine?
I do not know why they came up with that specific guidance. It makes sense that that gives a chance to decompress a system. And, you know, that does align with the 14 days, but it was not shared to my knowledge, and maybe it was prior to my time with the district, but I am not aware of the reasoning behind a 2 week approval window from the Department of Education.
So a 2 week, it could be potentially compressed, but we would be looking, if you look at multiple 2 week intervals, you could look at a 4 week window, a 6 week window.
I think they did give a reason for the 2 weeks. And so I guess there were two things I wanted to address. I'm not ready to answer the question yet about the direction for the superintendent, but I feel like there's some factual things that I just want to get clear on. It's hard for me to follow the conversation because I feel like we're having two different conversations. I feel like the 2 week window, the 2 weeks was always from the very beginning of all of this set by the governor, because the governor, the Department of Ed, the teachers unions, and the superintendents all said they needed 2 week notice to kind of move that ship around. And so I feel like from the very beginning, that was where the 2 week window came from, was giving people time to pull themselves together. And so even when she was going to say, I'm going to have everybody come back, I'm going to give you 2 weeks notice that we're coming back. So I feel like that actually came from the governor. And then in terms of the confusion, I feel like this is a really important issue. And because I feel like if anything, the board needs to own the confusion, either the board or the district, because we just had maybe 2 meetings back when we had guests come, we had been told several times not to use the metrics as a hard cutoff. I remember someone from the district even saying, just because we get to X number doesn't mean so-and-so is going to happen, because we had to have a little wiggle room and be flexible. And so now it kind of feels unfair to now turn around and say, well, now we're going to use a hard cutoff. And so I feel like I feel like the message from the board is confusing. And then for teachers to be reacting to what we just told them about no hard cutoffs and being confused by now being brought back on a hard cutoff is unfair to just, imply that the teachers should have known this was coming when we told them we weren't going to be using a hard cutoff. So I feel like just factually, I want to bring us all back to being sure that we are communicating clearly whatever it is we decide.
I appreciate that comment, Director Bankin, because you are right. It was the guidance matrix was to serve as that, as guidance matrix. And I think that's why Kathy, Dr. Arnold, pardon me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you provide us a 7-day outlook and a 7-day average, or 7-day positivity or 7-day average, as well as the 14-day average and 14-day positivity. Why is it that we hear about 7-day in addition to 14-day?
I had been including the 7-day to try to look at what's happening more recently. 7-day it can be predictive of direction because that's going to obviously be different or more recent than a 14-day projection would be. So that's why looking at 7 days just can, and not always, but can indicate directionality a little better than a 14-day can. So it can show some trending.
Okay.
And so it's another data point to try to look at where things are going.
As far as my thought on the 2 week thing, I would completely agree that if we're in hybrid and we decide to go online, that we should be in line for 2 weeks, right? I mean, that's the approval, and it also gives reason, as Director Benkin said, you can't turn the ship immediately. I would hesitate to say that you only go in multiples of 2 weeks, because then you're going to get yourself in the trap of you're 2 weeks in, the numbers are coming down, and you're just one off, and now you're going to request 2 more weeks when really you just need 1 day. I mean, that seems problematic to me. I mean, I would definitely say a minimum of 2 weeks makes sense, but then it's a minimum of 2 weeks, monitor the metrics, monitor the guidance, and go with where we go. Because I think a thing we got to take into account, and thank you for bringing it up, Director Binkham, because I think there is some confusion. The updated guidance indicators, I mean, the first paragraph even says it, these are not hard data based on numbers to make a decision. This is, we want to take into account factors outside of those, and we're relying upon staff to do that and make recommendations. In no way does that document say staff has to make recommendations only based on the numbers. It actually says the opposite. It makes recommendations based on what's going on in the schools, what you're seeing about academic, social, emotional well-being, staff feedback, all of that. Because I remember why we wrote that up. It's because, 2 months ago, it seems like forever ago, when Superintendent Reisner was very clear with us, there are students involved here. There are students that are hurting. There are students, as we heard last meeting, that are just completely lost in the system, and we don't even know where they are. There are students that are failing and struggling and having social emotional issues and mental health issues. We're trying to take that into account too. And as a board member, that's not my job, not my expertise. So that's why I rely upon the superintendent and her staff to make a recommendation, not just based on the data, but based upon what they're seeing. And then my job is to react to that, not to say what that recommendation should be based on a matrix. So I guess that's my feedback to the questions that were posed about what should the procedure be. I mean, the procedure I would think is, if we go 100% online, we guarantee we'll do it at least for 2 weeks. And no matter what model we're in, we're going to be watching the numbers to see if we need to change, and watching what's going on in the buildings and watching what's going on in the students. And when I say we, I mean the district, Superintendent Reisner and her staff. They're the ones with the pulse on that. And they come to us with recommendations based on that. If we get in the middle of that and instead say that your recommendations always have to be this based on this, there's not even a reason to have the staff involved. And that's definitely not what I was intending in the stuff that I was working on and talking to people about.
So again, to your point, to your point, Director Bierbaum. So what happens with the Department of Ed allowing us for 2 weeks? So in that sense, we're saying that it is okay for Superintendent Reisner to listen to the district, to the Department of Ed advisement that we go for 2 more weeks, because that takes in consideration what happened in the whole state of Iowa. So I think that's the part that I'm conflicted with it. That the state gave us that 2 week online for a reason, right? There's something that Iowa it's imploding, like I think Director Benken mentioned. So I think that's another part that Superintendent Reisner has the flexibility on, that it is okay for her to listen to what the Department of Ed is saying, basically by authorizing our 2 more weeks. And in that sense, Superintendent Reisner, what with that? So when are we slotted to come back? The 14th of December.
The 14th of December.
Where does those 2 weeks put us then? Is that an additional week? From the state.
The 2 weeks that were granted to us began on Monday. That 2 weeks puts us to the 14th of December. So we would come back on the 14th of December.
Okay, so we're talking a week, right? We're talking a week. Okay, thank you.
So what you had asked me a question there, I think Director Colton too. I would agree. I mean, we're either in fully or we're not, as far as we're asking the staff to make a recommendation. And if that recommendation is taking into account other information, then yeah, I would expect that to be how it goes. And I think we have to be careful and think about all the considerations here. Right now, we're talking about a borderline recommendation on moving from 100% into hybrid. Well, there's also going to be this type of thing at the other level, right? Just like we had 2 months ago, where the superintendent might make a recommendation that, hey, we're a little above the limit that would say we could be 100% in person for the youngest kids, but because of what I'm seeing with social, emotional, and academic, I really think we need to move on that. I'd respect that opinion too. I mean, that's where the expertise of the staff is on coming together with those recommendations and having us react. I am a little bit disheartened right now in that the fact that the state gave the approval in a way that they don't give us the information about why they did it. You can't figure out, is there data behind it? Is it political? Is it because it was a holiday and they had a backlog and they just wanted to, we don't know. So it makes it really hard to take that into consideration. I think Superintendent Reisner said that, she can't say exactly why they did it. So that makes it very difficult for her to factor that into a recommendation. But to the point you said, yeah, I mean, I would say we would have staff making recommendations based upon much more than the matrix. And then they can explain what the reasoning is, right? That's exactly what we're here for, is to hear that and go from it.
So in taking notes, it's as clear as mud to me. So I really need some clear guidance on how you want me to bring these things forward and how you want the procedure to look. Because if I don't have that, then it sets myself and my staff up for failure. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to fail our students. And so what I heard, I've heard 3 people speak. I've heard we need to just remain in the 2 weeks. I've heard we need to remain in the 2 weeks and we need to wait to make a recommendation until we drop below the metrics. And I've heard if we're in hybrid from the 3rd, I've heard if we're in hybrid and go to online, we go the full 2 weeks. But if we're already in online, then we wait. And then from there, we wait for us to make a recommendation based on our professional judgment in a sense. I think that captured what you were saying, our professional opinion. So I've heard 3 very different things, and I haven't even heard from all the board members. So this is why there's confusion. This is exactly why there's confusion. So I need my staff and I need some clear guidance from the board on how you want this to go.
Put me down for 2 weeks.
I am with Director Beerbaum, hearing that Dr. Arnold said about the 2-week window in terms of the speculation of, I believe that 2 weeks for your first approval going into remote, yes, because it allows you that opportunity to calm down your situation. But after that, I think it's an incredibly dangerous proposition to moving in 2-week intervals when our goal and our primary purpose is to educate students. And we have heard over and over in the past 2 months about how we are missing students, we are failing students, and we heard just today that especially our PK to 2 kids are struggling. So I cannot in good conscience go on this random number of 2 weeks, and I'll say random because I have not heard a definitive answer or explanation of why the state has established a 2-week window. I can understand from the initial point that we moved to a remote only education model, 2 weeks. When I think about the science behind COVID-19, 2 weeks makes sense on that initial cycle. Past that, I do not understand why we would not rely on the professional expertise of our leader to say, based on this matrix, this is where I think we should shift.
I don't know if you put me down yet for 2 weeks, but please do. I do feel that if the numbers are going up to warrant repetitive requesting going online, then that means there's quarantine appropriate to that as well. So
Director Franzen, to go back, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. I didn't hit unmute in time. To go back to you and Director Beerbaum's recommendation, you're not, so the idea of us falling under the number isn't on your radar. That's not what you're saying. Like I heard earlier, not from you. I'm trying to, in my mind.
I don't understand. So I'm saying we have 2 weeks. So I'll use this as an example. November 13th, it was brought to us that we needed to move all of our buildings to a 2-week remote learning cycle. We did it. And that date was up November 30th. Beyond that, I believe we should follow the matrix, because I do not want to, for me, when I say 2 weeks, it's that initial 2 weeks in remote, but then we need to understand what that matrix is. Otherwise, why do we have that matrix?
So what I hear you saying then is beyond, so we're 2 weeks, we go for the full 2 weeks, the first approval. So we come out of hybrid. I'm trying to make sure I have this right. So we come out of hybrid and go into fully online, and we go in for the full 2 weeks. Once we've done that, if the conditions, if our metrics, I got to go with what you said, if our decision-making matrix show that we should remain in online, we do that for that period of time by using the metrics.
Yes, after that initial 2-week time period has passed, because that, I believe, my guess is following the science of the 14-day quarantining and following that spike, that allows you that opportunity. Locking ourselves into additional 2-week time periods, I believe, fails our students.
Okay, thank you. That clarification helped. You said you agreed with, or you wanted to say the same thing as Director Beerbaum, but he actually said something much different in how we decide when we come back. So you're saying use the metrics. He's saying not really, just we're going to rely on your professional opinion. So if you're above, I could make the recommendation, even if we're above what our metrics say, correct?
So I would say that I'm with Dr. Beerbaum in that, yes, I am relying on your recommendation. That's why we're here today, is you brought us a recommendation. That's what I'm looking for, is I want to understand what, as our educational leader, what is your vision and your recommendation? We voted and approved on the guidance matrix, yes, but what is your recommendation? After that 2-week, I'm saying after that 2-week period. Feel free, board members, to call me out if you think that.
No, I'm trying to understand. Are you saying you don't want the district to pursue an extension?
No, okay, thank you for clarifying. No, I think that the situation, so again, going with this situation, a week ago, we were told last Monday night that she was going to, that was in our board minutes, or in our agenda items, that you were going to file for another extension based on that. And understand, great, yes, go ahead and file for that. Yep, but then come Monday, because we've already passed that initial 2-week period, come Monday, when you emailed the board and said, we may need to reevaluate this week, because based on our matrix, I think our numbers are going to be at a place at the end of this week that we need to have a meeting and switch back into a different learning mode. That's what I am saying. Is that clear, Director Benkin? No,
so you're saying she's going to do, she does the application. If we get approval, we do the 2 weeks.
The initial.
If the initial 2 weeks, the whole 2 weeks. And then if there is an extension filed within that 2-week period is when we rely on the matrix. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. That's helpful. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wrote. So beyond the 2 weeks, we follow the matrix for return, for a recommendation to return.
And I would say that is coupled with your, I always want your professional recommendation, Superintendent Reisner. It was important to me when our work group got together that you and Dr. Allen, or Dr. Arnold, Kathy, I'm messing your name up today, that we were all together. My hope is that is the document that we are all behind. because that was my interpretation, is that was something we were all behind. So with that, I want to know your professional recommendation, because you understand the educational needs of our children. I don't.
And one thing I'd add with that is basically we're following Jenny's professional recommendation, and the request to the DOE is simply to allow it to be legal, right? I mean, that, as Jenny has said many times, the DOE request is just to allow the days to count. That's to allow us to do the things she's recommending.
That's a great point. Excellent point. I think that's really, yeah, exactly.
So Elisa, can I clarify one thing, that just to make sure I understand? You want to follow the metrics, but you're willing to have, you're saying that there can be a little wiggle room around that number based on Superintendent Reisner's professional opinion.
So today, Kathy, what was the number that we were at? We are at, what's our 14-day number? We are, say it.
63.5.
Okay, so based on that, we're not below our number right now, right? 60, that's the override. But based on Superintendent Reisner and Dr. Arnold's, because that's why we have that 7-day, I don't think we need to be below that 60 based on their professional recommendation of what does it look like, Dr. Arnold, and what is the trajectory, and Superintendent Reisner, educationally and emotional social growth of our students, based on those two things, bring us a recommendation. So today we've been brought a recommendation, even though we're not below the 60, it appears that we are headed in that direction based on the information that Dr. Arnold has presented today.
However, one factor to throw in there, because I heard what you said, and you said based on educationally and the social emotional, but also probably factor in and based on the teacher's ability to turn around. So if we kind of set that, if we kind of we kind of say we're gonna do that 3-day turnaround, yep, then that helps.
Yes, and I appreciate that clarification so that we have that time period in mind. And that's why I asked that question of, is your recommendation for Monday or is it from Wednesday? Because what I heard from the teachers was there was much concern about how quick this turnaround was. So that's why I wanted to know from your professional recommendation, what would it be an appropriate turnaround time at this point, Superintendent Reisner?
And understand that you're going to hear now from another large group of teachers who are going to say that we don't need a 3-day turnaround, bring kids back. So I just want to prepare you. There's both sides, and you heard from a group, but there's another group as well. So this is where I think the importance of me bringing forward the recommendation that I believe to be best for everyone, and we go with that.
Well,
yeah.
granted,
go ahead.
Granted, everyone's not going to agree, but if they know what to expect, that's going to make everyone feel better. And I've been trying to get a word in here. But I agree with Director, see, we're calling everyone doctor now, Director Franson and Director Bierbaum, that I think it should be a 2-week minimum. And after that, I don't think the governor is saying that you have to be in 2 weeks. She's just giving us grace to be in 2 weeks if we need to be. And I think that you, like everyone's been saying, we look to you for your professional opinion on what the teachers and students need and what they can do. We don't know those things. So if you say 3 days, I trust you that that's enough for teachers. If you said 5 days, I would trust you. If you said they could do it tomorrow, I would think that's a little crazy. But again, this is your ship. You know how quickly you can turn it around. We don't know. So I think that we move forward, in my opinion, with our 2-week minimum. If we're granted an additional 2 weeks, then we start to look at what's happening in our community. What are our indicators for our schools? What do you think we should be doing? And then you have a date at which, once that decision is made, of when that change is going to happen, based on whatever you recommend, that you can get your ship turned around. Whether it's 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever that is, that's what we're looking to you for, to tell us what that is.
And Director Lankaitis, what are your thoughts on when that meeting would be called? Do you feel it could be when Superintendent Reisner and Dr. Arnold feel that we're trending that way? Or would it be once that we've actually dropped below that number? I'm trying to keep track of everybody's opinions.
I have said all along that I don't think that the metrics or the guidance should be hard rules. I think they're meant to serve as guidance. And so do we wait to call it until it's 59 when we can see that it's been trending downward, or do we call it when it's 62 so we can plan ahead for when it goes? I don't know the answer to those questions. When we voted a few weeks ago to go 100% for PK through 5, the numbers looked like they were trending down. They looked great and everything exploded. So I don't know those answers, but if they were to call a meeting today to say it looks like they're trending down, we can look at the last 7 days and we can see that when we start dropping off some numbers at the top, we're going to keep going down, that we think in this magic number of how many days it takes to us prepare, that we reasonably could say, yes, we understand in your professional opinion that we're not quite below that number, but we're certainly trending that way so that in 3, 4, 5 days, we'll be ready. I can live with that without it being a hard drop below 60. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Made sense to me.
So Superintendent Reisner, do you have an opinion on what would be the best path forward? Are you supportive of the idea that, we would do the first 2 weeks and then any subsequent 2 weeks we would evaluate and go by the 3-day turnaround?
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. And I think if we communicate that out, then there's consistency and people know ahead of time. So, yep, I think we can do that, and I can be able to communicate with teachers that, it's a 3-day turnaround time. I don't want to bring something else up to muddy, but I do think this is our chance to talk. Another option is that we just review it like on a Wednesday or a Tuesday. We make that decision for the following week and always come back on a Monday. Just a thought. Oh, sorry.
I was actually going to ask that question because of the hybrid model and the way that is structured. Coming back on a Wednesday effectively could mean one group doesn't come at all next week and one group comes for 3 days. So I was going to ask what that would look like.
I know we can't take a vote because it's not on the agenda, but can we at least go around and get consensus? Because I don't agree. And it's okay if I'm outvoted, even though I'm using that word liberally. But I guess I feel like I don't feel like I have any clarity. I don't know if maybe you do, Superintendent Reisner. I don't know if I don't have any clarity. So I would just like to have some consensus that we as a group articulate versus just going with whoever spoke last. I think that would be the fair way to proceed.
So what I wrote down was aside from myself, we had 3 people who said 2 weeks, and then 3 people who said going by the 3 days. I did say 2 weeks. However, hearing what Director Bierbaum and Director Franzen said about having the initial 2 weeks and then evaluating that on a shorter time frame, moving past those 2 weeks makes sense to me. I feel in this current situation, I agree with what Director Perez said earlier, that everyone is predicting a spike. And I'm very fearful of making a decision today that we have to undo again in a few days, just like we did when we voted to go 100% in person, and then we had to undo, and then pretty quickly after that we were completely remote. And I think that is really difficult. That's not helping our students' social emotional well-being, and it's not helping families plan. So I'm concerned about that, I guess, in this particular situation. Overall, I support the idea of going with the initial 2 weeks and then evaluating it But I like what Superintendent Reisner said as well about, it makes sense to me that we would only want to start that on a Monday. And that if the numbers don't indicate that we can start it that next Monday, or it's not in her professional recommendation that we can start it on the Monday, it seems like it might make the most sense logistically to start it on the following Monday.
I guess my question on that, Superintendent Reisner, I understand we move out of when we moved out of hybrid to remote, you have to turn that on a dime. But we had kids who they did miss out on, our cohort 2 missed out on their turn in face-to-face. They missed those 3 days. So while I understand from a standpoint of having a complete week look the same, if we were to go back next Wednesday, that was the first day that we dropped out our first 2 or 3 schools when we went to 100% remote. So that would be my only thinking on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would just caution that could happen again, so I wouldn't use it as a decision-making reason, but I think it factors in, absolutely.
And I think that's why I would caution us in stating that as a part of this decision thing. I would actually turn to you to say, again, Superintendent Reisner, understanding the situation that we've been through, when we moved out of hybrid into remote, when do you believe is the best day that we should come back? And if it is in this case that coming back on Wednesday, because we dropped out at a Wednesday, that was the first day, then make the recommendation. If it isn't, that's fine. But I would rather provide you that flexibility rather than setting in stone now what that's going to be down the road, because we don't know what it will be.
That makes sense.
So for Director Shields Cook, you were collecting the kind of the 2 different options we have here, right? Does what Director Franzen just said comport with what you were saying is like that second option that you were supportive of letting Superintendent Reisner kind of choose the day? And we know softly that probably will tend to be Mondays, but she has the flexibility to make the recommendation. So therefore she can recommend whatever day she wants.
That makes sense to me. So just to kind of recap for everybody, if I'm understanding and pulling things together, and I know that potentially not everyone agrees, and I'm happy to hear everyone's perspective still, but it sounds like when we move into remote, we would stay in remote for a minimum of that first 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks, the district will evaluate based on the numbers. And if we drop below or close to our 60 cases per day, 14-day average, Superintendent Reisner and her team can make the decision to bring a recommendation to the board. So that would not be a directive from the board that you have to bring a recommendation, but that would be, you would make the decision about whether to bring a recommendation, and you would suggest a day that you think gives adequate turnaround for us to return to hybrid.
So are you then saying we table this until Monday or whenever we reach 60?
She just said the number isn't set in stone, didn't she?
No, that's not what she said. What she said is,
I said at or near. I said at or near.
No, you said below or close.
You did.
Oh, below or close to. Sorry, below or close.
I'm writing word for word because I want to make sure I get it right. You said below or close to. So that means I should have probably waited in that. The way that I hear those, what I believe below or close to would mean is that I should wait. I think
what I meant was that it would be looking at the trends and projecting that is your call to make. That when we're hitting near that 60, you can decide based on whatever factors, staffing and other things, whether you want to call the meeting when it's at 63 or whether you want to call the meeting when it's at 59, there's wiggle room for you based on your professional opinion of when that would happen. And that's what I heard some of the other board members saying too, I believe.
Yes.
Got it.
Agree.
How is that different than what brought us here today?
It isn't.
Thank you. I don't know.
I think
It is what brought us here today.
We just went in a big old circle.
But I think now we have consensus, and maybe not consensus, but we have heard from everyone. We have come up with a plan that incorporates the majority opinion, and are providing direction to the superintendent that also gives her the flexibility to determine, because one of my concerns coming into today was hearing this was because of a board directive, and I didn't feel that this was a directive that you must call this meeting as soon as we get close to that number. So I wanted clarity on that too. I'm not sure, Superintendent Reisner, based on circumstances today, would you have called this, is it your professional opinion that this was the appropriate time to call this meeting? Would you have called this given our new direction?
Yes, I would have. I would have, because what we're seeing, I can't act, I can only act on what we think and what we're seeing. And so what we're seeing is the numbers go down. They may or may not go back up. We don't know. I mean, we could be totally wrong on that. And if we're wrong, we keep kids out of school unnecessarily. And I don't want to do that. So I would have still brought this opinion forward and this recommendation forward. I would have preferred to bring it like on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, but we needed to wait another day so that we could make sure that what we were seeing held true for 3 days. And that was just so that we could make sure. If I would have brought it, on Wednesday morning or Tuesday afternoon, then it probably would have given the adequate time that staff needed, or some staff felt like they need. So, but I would have brought that recommendation forward the same.
I have 2 quick questions. So when you say it takes 3 days, is that 3 work days?
I think so, because I don't want teachers to feel like they have to use their weekends to work to.
So then the recommendation as stands isn't correct, because we don't have 3 days for them to come back on Monday.
It is correct. It is correct, because we didn't set these parameters. So these parameters weren't.
I don't mean that. In your professional opinion, to give staff enough time, they should not be returning on Monday the 7th.
I think it would be much better if, in my professional opinion, I believe it would be better if staff returned on Wednesday.
And
I move we amend the.
Can I just say one more thing? I thought I heard you say earlier in the meeting that you thought we should stay out until the 14th.
If we are going to go with the 2-week, so what I said is, if we are going to go with, if the board wants to go consistency wise, we should, if consistency and communication is the key, then the 2-week at a time is what we should go with, because that is consistent. Parents will know, teachers will know, everyone will know. So from that standpoint, absolutely. If what I hear the board saying is, we're okay with you making that professional opinion or recommendation based on what you're seeing educationally, social, emotional, with the staff, all of those indicators along with the metrics, then for sure, I feel like I would prefer to revisit it, because I want to get our kids in school as much as possible. The other way, the every 2 weeks, it works if we're going to stick right to our metrics. So if we're going to stick right to our metrics, then I would probably prefer we stay in that. But if we're going to have that wiggle room that I heard today, I think that benefits our kids the most. And that's what I would prefer.
Okay. And I guess the thing I would say, and there was a question of how is this different from what we had, right? I think it's that key thing that Superintendent Reisner just said there, of earlier in this meeting and in some of the email communications this week, the statement has been, well, the metrics say, or the board says, or other people say, I want it to always be the superintendent's recommendation is based upon this, right? That's where we have to end up, because otherwise we're removing the educational leader from the process. So I think that's the big thing where this would be different on how we would have gotten to where we're at. And thank you, Jenny, for summarizing what you think we should be doing right now.
So Superintendent Reisner, based on what I heard, I would like to offer to move to amend the motion that is on the table. And I'm looking at the date because I don't know the date, to move from going back rather than December 7th, moving to December 9th. That is what I heard you say, Superintendent Reisner.
Yeah, I don't know the date.
Okay, well, my phone says it's the 9th, so.
Okay, Wednesday.
Second.
I guess my only comment would be, I feel like that's probably a good middle ground. This meeting was supposed to take 10 minutes. Guess we're not having policy committee, but that's fine. This is more important. But I guess I can live with that as a middle ground. But what I want to just note is part of the reason we're here, so we're here because of our own choices, is when one of the very first initial decisions we had at the policy committee with regard to the IASB policy best practices was that the board you had to fill in the blank about who would be making the decision, whether it would be the board or it would be the superintendent. And we chose as a committee and as a board to let the board make those decisions, not the superintendent. But it kind of sounds like what we're saying is that we're now putting the superintendent in a position to be making the decisions, that once Superintendent Reisner brings the recommendation, we will trust her professional judgment because otherwise she wouldn't have brought it and we're just going to approve it. And I guess I just want to say, that puts her in a really uncomfortable position. And part of the reason we went that way was because we knew it was important for the board to be making those decisions. We knew it was important for the board to take the hits from the community and not the superintendent. And we knew that there would be people who would be coming for her license if she were in any way out of step with what the governor wanted. And so I just want to make sure we're all clear that the policy says we should not be putting the superintendent in this particular position.
But is it the difference between a recommendation and a decision? Because aren't we voting on this?
But the decision is based on the recommendation, which we've said we will trust her professional judgment. I'm just putting it out there. I understand what you're saying, but what we basically said is, we're not going to follow what the Department of Education, after our first bite at the apple, we're not going to follow the 2 weeks that the Department of Education says. We're now going to put the obligation on the superintendent to let us know when is the time for us to make the decision. And so I'm just saying that's different than how we started all of this. Not that it's the wrong place to be, it's just different than the guidance the board gave the superintendent when this all started. So just something to remember, because we have to evaluate her. And part of what happens is, I think there's just been so much evolution in the way as a board we've decided to navigate this. And it's just important to put it out there that some of the guidance has probably felt incredibly inconsistent. And I just wanted to note that, just to put it out there.
And I agree with that and appreciate you mentioning that, because I still do not see it. I don't want it to fall on the shoulders of the superintendent completely. I agree that I think it's a recommendation, and I will still ask for the rationale behind those recommendations. And that, I think, is where the board makes their decision. So we hear the recommendation, we ask for the rationale, and then that determines, each individual decides how they proceed with that.
So I think we have to vote on the amendment, right?
Yes, I was going to say it has been moved by Franzen and seconded by Lenkaitis to return to hybrid learning on December 9th in amending the current motion from December 7th. All those in favor indicate, or do I need to ask for discussion again?
The vote's just on updating the motion. It's not a vote
Oh, you're right.
to
Okay,
say that
thank
we'll
you.
do it.
Thank you. So voting on the amended motion. So all those in favor of amending the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay. Passes 5-2. And now I have to go back and find the motion to read. So, okay. So the new motion is I move, or does someone needs to give the new motion, correct?
Isn't the motion already on the table and then we amended it?
Yes, I believe you gave it.
We amended it. And so now we're voting on to approve the transition to hybrid learning model for grades PK through 12 starting on December 9th. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay.
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 Passes 4-3. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's moved by Benkin, seconded by Perez. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0.
Have a great day, everybody.
Policy committee will be canceled.